If I had to write my debut novel all over again, knowing what I know now, here is what I would do differently. I spent years figuring it out the hard way, reading every craft book, changing my process a dozen times, second-guessing everything. And in this video, I'm going to share what actually worked, what I would do differently, and the mindset shifts that helped me get through the hard times. And I bet these tips will help you too. Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Kaylee. I'm a writing coach, the creator of Write or Die magazine, and an agented novelist. And on this channel, I share more behind the scenes of writing and publishing a book, trusting your inner rhythms in the process, and a soft life approach to creativity. So if that's something you're interested in, I hope you'll subscribe. So before we dive into what I would have done differently when writing my first book, I just want to have a little disclaimer here that this is just my process and what worked for me. And I'm not saying that you should do any of this, but I do think that writing is a very lonely practice, and not all of us have community in our life to sort of bounce ideas off of or talk about what actually goes into a writing life and a creative life. So my goal here is to not only share these tips, but hopefully to find camaraderie with each other. I want this to kind of feel like we're sitting at a coffee shop talking about our books. I think one of the best things we can do when we listen to videos or hear people talk about their process is to just take it as their experience and kind of take and leave what resonates with us and what doesn't. And if you aren't sure what stage you're in your writing life, or you need clarity on where to go next in your journey, I actually made a quiz that you can find through the link in the bio, and it will show you where you're at and kind of what sort of resources or support you need. So you can find that below. So for part one of this video, I want to talk about what I wish I knew when drafting. So just a little background, I started writing my first novel in 2021. It is an upmarket novel about a diner waitress who gets a job in the restaurant of an elite New England country club where she learns of the dark side of the wealth she desperately seeks. That was the hook in my query letter that got me an agent in 2024. I started querying in May, I signed with my agent in September, and as I'm filming this right now, we just went out on submission to try to get it published in 2025. So this was the first novel that I have ever written, that I have ever attempted, and hopefully it will be my debut as far as publishing goes. So one thing that I wish that I had known goes along with what I talked about in the disclaimer at the top of this video, is I wish that I had stopped obsessing over other people's process. I think that it's so interesting to learn what other people do, but for me, it led to what I call information overload, where I was just consuming so much information like podcasts and craft books. And of course I learned things, but I feel like it put me in sort of like a paralyzed state of so many opinions, so much information that it was really stalling my writing. And I think where that stemmed from was I don't have an MFA. I didn't go to a graduate program to learn how to write a novel. I have a bachelor's in English and I minored in creative writing, and I've been reading and writing my whole life. But this was my first time attempting to write a novel. And I think I just got really stuck in this idea of doing it right. And I think that's where the information overload came from. I was just trying to consume so that once I started writing, I just would know what to do. And now that I've already gone through that, that's kind of crazy. And I'm not saying that to tear myself down. I'm just saying it as like your novel is going to teach you how to write it. You're only going to learn how to write it by writing it. And I think obsessing over other people's process and what they did took away from me in those probably the first few months of understanding what I actually wanted to try to do, what my process could look like, what I wanted to write about, and I just sort of fixated on what other people were doing, so I will not do that again. The other thing I would do different when drafting is to let go the need to know everything in order to start. Sort of going off of being obsessed with process, I was also obsessed with steps and how to write a novel and outlining and what everyone else said you needed to do in order to write it. And I learned along the way that the best thing to do is to let go of all of that and let go of that control and trust that the first draft is going to be crappy. That time of discovery and curiosity in that first draft is so precious and so fun, and it can be playful if you allow it to be. Like I mentioned, letting go of control and relaxing into the process. That's not an easy thing. I'm not saying that I even have that figured out now, but I think that it helps so much, especially in the beginning, because that first draft is really just your discovery draft. Some people call it draft 0 because it's just kind of you word vomiting on the page and like figuring out what you even want to say, what the story could be about. And I think even if you have some direction, you're always going to be surprised. And I recommend embracing that instead of feeling panicked by it. Continuing with that theme of letting go of control, I would also tell my past self that you don't have to be so obsessed with outlining. I thought that that's what I was supposed to do, and I really stressed myself out a lot in the beginning trying to build an outline, but I didn't know everything about my story. As I mentioned, it's about a woman who ends up working at an elite New England country club, and that was sort of all I had. I knew I wanted her to work in the club, I knew there would be a mother-daughter element, and I knew there would be camaraderie within the staff as opposed to just talking about the rich people, but I didn't really have who my character was, what her motivations were, what her desires were beyond seeing if she wants to be part of this lifestyle or obtaining the money that working in this place could allow her. So when I started writing an outline, I just would get so frustrated because I would think, if I don't know how to write this story or I don't know what's going to happen, is it falling apart? And as I learned, I'm not an outliner, or I'm definitely not an outliner in the beginning. One thing I did learn was that I enjoyed outlining around draft 4 or 5, and that was because I found this book. It's called The Plot Whisperer, and it breaks down story structure in a way that at the time really resonated with me, but I would not recommend that book if you were in your first, second, or maybe even third draft. Don't pick it up. I think it's better to have a book like this that talks about story structure when you already have a lot to work with. Like I mentioned, it was draft 4, so I had quite a lot of pages and I had some idea of what was happening now. I was building momentum. So I think craft books can be great at certain stages of your draft, and for me, it was not at the beginning. And the last thing I would have told my past self back in that drafting stage was to accept that this is going to take a while. I firmly believe that each novel you write is going to take a different amount of time. For me, for this first book, it took me 4 years between actually starting to draft it and querying it and working with my agent to get it into the shape that we needed to go on submission. That also means that I will probably be editing it again once we get an editor at a publishing house. So let's just say 5 years for this book. I'm super curious when I write my second novel if it will also take that long, but either way, I'm going to have to internalize this advice that I'm giving now, is that it takes the time that it needs to take. I think that we have to have an element of acceptance and relaxation in this process, and I think that writing takes a long time, especially if you want to build a really good and compelling story. It's going to take lots of revisions, lots of passes, lots of thinking, and lots of years. So for part 2, let's talk about revision and what I would have done differently and what I would have told my younger self as she started these revisions years ago. So as of right now, I think my novel has gone through something like 10 revisions. It has to be up there. I have done multiple on my own, and then as I mentioned, I did a few rounds with my agent. We did about 4 before we went out onto submission. So it's gone through the ringer quite a few times. But I have to say, one thing I did find out about myself is that I love revision. And that's not to say that every draft filled me with joy. I had many breakdowns and many bouts of frustration and many times where I thought the book was falling apart. But for the most part, I really enjoy the act of taking something and molding it. And I think that I get very intimidated by drafting because that's starting from scratch. That's a blank page. Like I mentioned, I plan to write a second novel, and I am a little nervous about that drafting phase because I have to get everything that's in my head onto the page from scratch. There's nothing I can work with there. But I have decided to embrace that I am a reviser, and I really enjoy it for the most part. I was also really lucky to land an agent who was an editorial agent. That was something that we talked about in our initial call when she offered me representation. I wanted an editorial agent and she wanted a client that would be open to that. And so that was one of the reasons we were a match. I mean, this is my debut novel. I want it to be as good as it possibly can be. And I wanted the opinion of someone who is selling books, who knows the industry in a way that I don't. But back to what I would have done differently. I would remind myself that it's okay to start revising wherever you feel excited. And what I mean by that is you don't have to edit from start to finish. You can start wherever you want. One of the things that was really eye-opening for me was I was listening to a podcast with the writer Elle Nash. If you don't know her, you need to stop this video and go pick up her latest book, Deliver Me. It is one of the most wild novels you'll ever read. I absolutely love Elle. But on the podcast, she talked about how she edits often from the end of her novel to the beginning. So she starts with the last chapter and then moves to the second to last chapter and onward. And at the time, that advice just really reignited the slump I was in. And it just sort of reminded me that I don't have to write in order, I don't have to revise in order. Once I did my edit that way, it completely revitalized the draft that I was working on, and I felt a whole new sense of clarity. So ever since then, I have sort of flip-flopped with each draft. So, say draft 5, I started at the end and moved to the beginning, and then when I went back for draft 6, I did the beginning to the end and back and forth. I think that it's a great way to switch things up for your writer brain, but it also reminds you that the beginning needs to inform the end of your story and the end needs to inform the beginning. So you sort of understand the character's arc in a new way, or in a way that will make the story work for your reader. So the next thing I really needed to internalize when I was a baby novel writer was to take breaks. And what I mean by that is long, substantial breaks between drafts. I feel like I was really obsessed with momentum. And so every time I took a break, I felt like I was just completely stalling this process even longer or just making it last even longer. But breaks are crucial for your story. I have a writing partner and she was someone who really instilled in me this need for breaks. Oftentimes I wanted to just finish a draft and then move right into the next revision, but she always encouraged me to take at least a month off between each draft. And like I said, it killed me inside at first to think that I was making this even longer, but it actually ended up saving me so much. Taking time away from the story that you've just been immersed in for so long just sort of allows your brain to think about it in a different way. It allows you to daydream about your characters and your story and all the things that make up your book. I think that sometimes holding ideas in your head and mulling them over as opposed to just jumping on the page is really, really helpful. I feel like every time I went back to the story, it just kept getting better and better with those month-long breaks. And lastly, during this revision stage, I would have not felt so guilty about prioritizing this book in my life. I think that we often place importance on things that provide us with money or an immediate result. And a book is not going to do that. A book is going to be a very long time of your life. But we're creative beings, and I was being called to that work for a reason, and so are you. And we might never know that reason, but what is life if we're not honoring the calling that has been put on our heart? Art is one of the best things we have in this life, and if you're called to create it, I don't think you should ever feel guilty for pursuing it. So for part 3, I'm gonna share 2 mantras that saved my life. They were 2 post-it notes that I kept at my desk, and I'm gonna share what they are and what they meant to me and maybe why you should put them at your desk too. So the first one is, the process is the point. Now before you roll your eyes, it's cliche for a reason. Publication is awesome. It's aspirational and it can be fulfilling in so many ways, but it's also fleeting. And what's not fleeting is you and your book. You and your book and all the hours, days, months, years you spend writing it, thinking about it, getting close to your characters, world building, all of the things. That's the process and that is the point. One of the things I learned is I had to pretend that no one will ever see this book and submit to the process as opposed to resent it. It's going to be really hard at times, and so having this reminder near my desk really helped me to remember to stay grounded within the work, my true work as a writer. And the second note I had at my desk was, your feelings about the work don't determine its value. I can't remember where I heard this, but I immediately wrote it down. No matter what, you're going to have bad days. You're going to produce bad work. But everything you make, all of your art, is still valuable. There were so many days where I thought, this book is crap. No one's ever going to read it. I don't even like it. Why am I spending my time doing this? And even in those moments of emotional upheaval, your work is still valuable. We can often feel as though because we hate it or because we're frustrated with it, that it actually is garbage, or however you want to say it. But no matter what, it's still valuable. I think every attempt at a book or any piece of art, whatever you're doing, is so important. And for me, this is who I am. I'm a writer, I always will be. And so therefore, I am always producing valuable things as I write because it's my art and my art is valuable. It's not gonna be great with every draft, it's not gonna be great right away, but I am still an artist, I am still a writer, and my attitude about the work does not lessen it or make it not valuable. So to wrap up, I just want to encourage you to keep going. No matter where you are in your process, keep going, keep writing, keep trusting the process. And remember that your art matters and you have every right to be producing it. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you want some clarity on where you are in your writing journey or your writing path, you can take my quiz, which you can find in the link in the bio. And if you liked this process talk and you want to dive into some more mindset shifts or small habits to keep building your creative life, you can watch this video here. So I'll see you over there or in my next one. Bye.